my good friend, and he is exactly that. John Bacon, how have you been, my friend?
I'm doing shockingly well out here in the cornfield, Michigan. Steve, always a pleasure, and I hope that your Penn State listeners know what a pro you are and your great reputation throughout the Big Ten. So how's that?
Well,
that's not fatuous. That's over beer as well. I'll say it to your face. So there you go.
John, you're too kind. Too kind, too good to me. All right, so let's start with this. As somebody who has chronicled Michigan for such a long time, Jim Harbaugh was asked about who JJ McCarthy reminded him of. And he said, me. That's right. So as somebody who watched Jim Harbaugh, who, by the way, had a really good pro career, play at Michigan, and you see JJ now, what are some of the similarities, but also at the same time, what are some of the contrasts?
I would say both are effective, if not fancy passers. But they don't throw interceptions. That was a Bo rule and a Paterno rule, certainly. You know that.
Yep.
And both are willing to leave the pocket when they have to. Now, JJ's a better runner, frankly, than Jim Harbaugh was. But Jim was not afraid to leave the pocket and get the 5 or 10 they needed. So that part's all the same, highly competitive, I would say that. The flip side is this. JJ McCarthy has yet to play anybody, and in 2 days he will. So Jim had back then, of course, we know how it was in the old days. Michigan played 9 Big Ten teams, and somebody like Notre Dame and Navy maybe, or Notre Dame and Maryland, serious teams. JJ really hasn't faced anybody of note yet. So it's kind of like 2 heavyweight prize fighters here. They're both undefeated, both teams, of course, and yet we're about to find out how good either one of them is, and really it's hard to tell. It's a very hard game to pick, I think. Yeah,
no, I agree that I felt the same way going into when people asked me about when Penn State went to Auburn. They said, how good is Auburn? I said, I don't know. right? And look,
hard to find out.
Right, and everybody, you're going to find out. Saturday at 4:00, we'll have an answer. I know that. Blake Corum, who did not play in the Penn State game last year because he was banged up, what does he mean to what they want to do, not only rushing the football, but also in the passing game?
Steve, right now he is the offense. Now, JJ's had a good season, he's got good numbers, and so on. But without Blake Corum in these games, and he's scored 4 and 5 touchdowns in some of these games, some crazy numbers. If he was out, then it would all be on JJ McCarthy's shoulders. Now, Donovan Warren, some other guys in the backfield are pretty good too. So we'll see what happens there, of course. But the pressure on JJ would be very, very different. And for a first-year starter, that has been a blessing for him, is having Blake Corum. And that's, of course, been the Penn State model throughout the time I've been watching you guys, is often a very strong quarterback. Almost always you will get a strong quarterback with a very strong tailback, and that's what happens here.
Right, and that's what you're seeing this year, what it's meant to get Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen into the Penn State offense, exactly. And how much the benefits have been there. What did last year do to reinvigorate the Michigan fan base?
It saved it, Steve.
Yeah.
It saved Harbaugh's job. I mean, look, there are no sacred cows in this world, and he comes back as Mr. Michigan, grew up here, of course, played here, and so on. And yet, I mean, if you did a straw vote of the fans in December of 2021, you'd probably, or 2020, that COVID year, you'd probably have a majority who would say, let him go.
Yeah.
And athletic director Ward Manuel did, I would suppose, the quote-unquote next best thing by giving him a do-or-die contract, basically, half the pay, essentially. So his back was truly against the wall, and what he did, people don't really talk about. He changed, swapped out 6 of his 10 assistant coaches. That's a pretty big boy bet. You live or die with that one. And the 6 he brought in were almost all younger guys, and that worked famously well, and they're still doing it today. But the whole Harbaugh era was on a razor's edge.
Yeah, it's interesting because you feel like, at least I've felt, it's almost like watching the Worcester to the Boston shuttle. I feel like I'm watching the Ravens to Michigan shuttle and vice versa. I mean, I know Minter had to make a stop, by the way. I think it was at Vanderbilt. Then he came in there. But still, that's what I felt. I felt like I'm watching like Toledo to Detroit back to Toledo.
This is, it basically is. Of course, Jim and John Harbaugh, of course. John is the Ravens coach. There must be 3 or 4 of the coaches. They've had 4 or 5 or 6 who have coached at both places, which is how many coaches coach in NFL and college in the first place, let alone these two schools. So genetics, Steve, may be a factor.
Yeah, it might be in this case. But you know what? I think it's interesting that it's given each the college and pro experience on a staff. And how much do you think that's benefited Michigan?
Quite a bit. And again, he had good coaches before, but there were 2 and 4 in the COVID year. In the modern era, it seems to me, if you get more than 4 or 5 years out of a assistant coach, that's substantial. The idea of Paterno having the same assistants for 20 years, Bo had the same assistants for 20 years, a lot of them, not all of them. I don't know if that's going to happen again. So I think that the NFL experience is very valuable for these guys. Furthermore, in recruiting, it's what the players want to hear.
Look, I know Schoonmaker's done a great job at tight end, coming off a big game in Indiana, but he's played well the entire time. But what is getting Ronnie Bell meant? Getting him back after he sat out almost all of last year.
Yeah, he's a captain who got injured in the first game last season, then out for the entire year, which is a big guy for anybody, of course. Essential in the same way that Michigan is not. There's no one receiver right now. There's no one tight end. That they need to mix it up, and for their offense to work. Of course, Penn State's challenge, and for me, Michigan's challenge facing Penn State is force the quarterback to limit his choices. But right now, Michigan's got a tight end. It's an old school offense. Tight ends available, of course, so that's been clearly valuable for Michigan. But the idea of giving JJ other targets to go downfield with, what he's not done very much and very well is gone long. And for a guy with a good arm, that's something that Penn State might challenge him to do. That has been an unexposed weakness so far, I would say.
Whenever you and I talk, we always talk about some of the big-ticket items. So I'm going to venture away from the game for a moment because obviously what has been your thought process about seeing USC and UCLA and that announcement made on June 30th? What did you think of it, and what do you think of it moving forward?
Utterly mixed, Steve, on the grand scale. First of all, from the fan point of view, what are we doing? It's crazy. Look, the Big Ten, I love it. But when Penn State joined the Big Ten, everyone loved that. That was uniformly well received. I was out there in '93 working at the hockey camp years ago, and I wrote a big piece for the Associated Press on what Penn State's all about. And the reception was 100% positive. Nebraska, I felt the same way. It's a good fit. It's contiguous and so on. Rutgers and Maryland, much less so, frankly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Both good schools, no complaint there. But what are they adding to the Big Ten? Hard to say.
Agreed.
USC and UCLA, big names, but is it a conference? Is it a league? What is it exactly? Right. They at least not try to claim, Steve, that it's for the good of the student athletes or anything other than the TV bottom line, which is what it is. On the flip side, which is the business side, look, they're going to join either the Big Ten or the SEC, and I guess it might as well be the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Certainly jacks the money up, and that's good for everybody, obviously. And if the Big Ten is going to compete against the SEC, which is about the only two conferences left at that level, then they probably have to have them. So I guess necessary evil is where I stand. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And remember what the title of John's book was, okay? The soul of college football.
Yeah, well.
All right? And that was 10 years ago. All right?
I know, man.
So,
I'm doing
it. Exactly. Now, but I want to make one quick point, and that is you had so many long sit-downs with Bo. Everyone knows Bo, the only reason Bo was uneasy about Penn State was because he wasn't told about it. It wasn't about Penn State. It had nothing to do with Penn State. Zero. Bo actually really liked Penn State.
Oh, he loved Penn State. In fact, in his book that he and I wrote together, he spent a paragraph extolling the very direct and straightforward uniforms. So those uniforms look right to me.
Yeah.
Down to the black shoes, man. Nothing fancy there. He had immense respect for Joe Paterno. And Joe Paterno, by the way, was offered the job at Michigan before Bo was.
Yep.
A lot of folks don't know that.
Yep.
Loved Penn State, had no problem with them being in the Big Ten. In fact, liked the idea. He was only upset about one thing, and that is the ADs made the decision, the presidents, really, before talking to any AD. Including Bo. So that was his problem, was the process, but not the results.
Right.
And he loved going to State College, and he went there often.
Oh, in fact, one of the great moments, just on a personal point of view, Bo comes in, and I'm watching Bo and Joe walk together on the practice field and stage, just walking like they're walking toward Haluba Hall, and I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of cool to stand here and look at that.
Absolutely. Two of the legends, two of the Titans. Right. But Bo had very positive feelings about Paterno, of course, and Penn State.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what people need to understand. It's the process of it that he was not enamored with, not who it was going to be. And
you got that exactly right.
Yep. So, and I always have wanted to make that clear to everybody when they hear about, well, Michigan was getting, no, it was how it was done, not who it was. Which then brings us to, obviously, it was interesting listening to the commissioner on Tuesday in Minneapolis. After being rather gung-ho, I thought, in July at Football Media Days in Indianapolis, he was rather measured about going beyond 16. And then he said to Mike DeCourcy in his interview, and I just want to get the quote correct. He says that when he sits there and he looks at it, he says it could be a year, could be 5 years, could be 7. He says, but it's the landscape of the way it. How do you look at how he has been handling this up front, and how interested were you by how measured he was on Tuesday as opposed to last July?
I think it's probably maturing in the role, if you will, because you really had, obviously a smart guy, NFL guy, and so on, but that's a big boy job right there. I recall Devin Gardner, whom Penn State beat up more than once, quarterback saying, and it certainly applies to Happy Valley, that you have no idea how big that stage is until you're on it, and then it's too late.
Yeah.
And I think that you have no idea how big that stage is till you're on it, and I think you've learned that, like a president of the United States, everything you say is parsed. Everything you say is broken down, and, it all comes with complications. In this particular case, obviously adding USC and UCLA changes the whole dynamic of the Big Ten. It's now going to be 16 teams. Divisions might go away, which, frankly, with Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State in the same division, maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
But also the other question is, how many slices of the pie do you want to cut up? That anybody you add, you don't just add them to add them, because then you just divide it again. So it needs to be a Notre Dame or somebody of that ilk, not just two more Pac-12 teams, I think. So I think he's kind of learned just how big this job is and just how complicated things get.
And it's almost
like some Twitter followers I can name, by the way. And in case your listeners are following, all I can say is, mea culpa. Something sounded a lot funnier over a phone call with a buddy than sound on Twitter. So, hey, what's all you got to do?
I know.
I bet they know what I'm talking about.
I'm sure they do. I know. It is. Believe me, I'm sure they do. But John, it's almost like, that's the exact quote I've had to people over and over again. You don't look at Ward Manuel, Pat Kraft, and Gene Smith and say, hey, look, we're going to dilute the number you're going to get because we're going to add people. You don't do that. They're going to look at you and go, I don't think so.
That's right. And give the Big Ten a compliment here, and Kevin won. Once you've added USC and UCLA, and Texas and Oklahoma are already at SEC, what's left?
Exactly.
Honestly, Notre Dame. But the Blue Bloods are all pretty much called for. And that includes, obviously, Penn State. So, Penn State, Nebraska's not worked out from a competitive point of view as well as expected, but that's undeniably a blue blood. Who's left?
Yeah.
I guess Washington and Oregon, but you're starting to slice that pie up again.
Yeah, you're starting to slice the pie up, but again, there's only so many Grand Slams out there. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC. Those are, to me, are primary brands. Then you get to the secondary brands, and to me, Washington and Oregon are really good secondary brands. But then so's Nebraska, so's Wisconsin. So, you already got that. So that's why when I look at it, to me, John, it's about management. When you sit there, what are you going to do with your women's soccer team? How are you going to integrate men's soccer, right, to go with this? And traveling everybody. Do you block schedule and send them all out together, right, to then do a weekend, and then they do a weekend coming here? These are the complications of the management of it where, hey, let's just go to 20. Well, now it complicates it even more.
That's exactly right, Steve, as usual. And I think, honestly, when you get down to, Big Ten, unlike the SEC averages 17 or 18 sports per school. Penn State,
Good point.
Michigan State, Ohio State, man, they got, 30 or so.
Yep.
And, one of the great stories, I think, of Penn State athletics has been their great performance in volleyball and other sports you wouldn't think of necessarily, wrestling certainly, that don't get the attention of football and basketball. But you know what? They take their sports very seriously. You guys can pack the place for some of those sports. Well, the volleyball team, the wrestling team is going to go to out west. Where a lot of complications there that you don't think of at the time. They go far beyond football and basketball.
I always love talking to this guy. I can't. Part of this is I can't wait to see you on Saturday. So I'm really looking forward to it, John. Thanks so much for taking the time to do it. We're going to. I don't care. Penn State and Michigan. This will be okay. They'll play this weekend. We're going to get you back on the show and talk about some big picture stuff in about a month or so. How about that?
Love to, anytime. And by the way, all my Twitter friends, hello, and I swear to God, nothing but love for Penn State. And, Steve, you know that.
I know, absolutely. And I talked to Mike Motti. I saw Mike about a month ago, right? Talks glowingly about you, as always, like we all do. John.
Well, when your fans see the movie, which is finally going to come out, I think, Saving the Roar, this guy gets a little choked up talking about those guys, because what those guys did in 2012, I and you and the Penn Staters will never forget. One of the great stories of college sports, period.
And John is, you're great in it. I mean, really fabulous. So makes a big
thank
difference.
you for that. But Steve, you're a pro in it, unlike me.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. John, can't wait to see you on Saturday, and we'll talk then, and then we'll get you back on here in about a month or so and just talk about big picture stuff again.